The Zephyrin Council chamber hung, suspended in the void between three dying stars. Ambassador Crickstow's tentacles trembled as he reviewed the impossible sensor data for the 100th time. The readings had to be wrong. They simply had to be. "Confirm these measurements," he commanded, his voice crackling through the translator. Around him, dozens of species that had conquered entire star systems now huddled together like frightened younglings. "Confirmed, Ambassador," squeaked Technical Officer Mip from the Glorthian delegation. Her 6 eyes blinked rapidly, a sure sign of terror among her kind. "The vessel it's beyond anything in our databases. Length, 47 kilometers. Width, 18 kilometers. Mass readings they're off our scales." The holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing a behemoth that defied every principle of shipbuilding the Galactic Coalition knew. Where their vessels were sleek, efficient, built for speed and maneuverability, this thing was a monument to raw, unbridled power. Its hull was a patchwork of different metals, as if its builders had welded together whatever they could find and somehow made it space-worthy. Weapon ports dotted its surface like the scales of some ancient dragon, each one large enough to swallow a coalition frigate whole. "Surely it's a derelict," offered Commander Zek of the Altarian fleet. "No species could maintain life support on something that massive. The energy requirements alone." His words died as new data streamed in. The ship wasn't just active, it was accelerating. Space itself seemed to bend around it as it approached, its drives leaving a trail of distorted reality in its wake. "Where did it come from?" someone whispered. Crickstow knew the answer, though he wished he didn't. For 300 cycles, the Galactic Coalition had avoided that one small, unremarkable system on the galaxy's outer edge. Earth. The quarantine had been unanimous after the first contact disaster. The humans had been deemed too primitive, too violent, too unpredictable to join civilized space. Better to let them destroy themselves, the Council had decided. Better to wait until they evolved past their savage nature. Now, staring at the monstrosity bearing down on Coalition space, Crickstow realized their terrible mistake. They hadn't quarantined Earth to protect the humans. They had quarantined it to protect themselves. The first transmission came through on all frequencies simultaneously, drowning out every other communication in the sector. The voice was unmistakably human, speaking in heavily accented galactic standard. "Attention, Galactic Coalition. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force vessel Retribution. We've come to discuss your quarantine." The chamber erupted in panicked voices. Species that had been enemies for millennia suddenly found common ground in their terror. The saurians hissed and coiled around their perches. The crystalline Vorthan hummed at frequencies that shattered lesser crystals. Even the warrior Krogan, who prided themselves on facing any foe, looked uncertainly at their weapons. "How do they build it?" Mip's question cut through the chaos. "Their technology was centuries behind us. We monitored them. We watched them struggle to reach their own moon." But Crickstow was beginning to understand. The Coalition had made the same mistake every advanced civilization made. They had confused refinement with superiority. While they had been perfecting their technologies, making them smaller, more efficient, more elegant, the humans had taken a different path. "They didn't build it like we would," he said slowly. "Look at it. Really look at it." The others followed his gaze to the hologram. Now that the initial shock was wearing off, details became clearer. The ship's hull wasn't just a patchwork. It was a deliberate design. Different sections served different purposes, each one optimized for its role. Where Coalition ships were generalists, this monster was a specialist in everything. "Those are mining lasers," gasped a Tellarite engineer. "But they've been modified. The power output, they could core a moon with those." And there pointed another. "Those aren't just shield generators. They're overlapping, redundant. You'd have to break through 17 layers before even scratching the hull." "The drive signature," Mip added, her voice rising in pitch. "It's not one type of propulsion. It's all of them. Fusion, antimatter, something that looks like they're literally ripping holes in space." The human ship continued its approach, steady and implacable. It wasn't trying to hide its capabilities. If anything, it was showing off, like a predator displaying its teeth. Perhaps we should attempt communication, suggested a previously silent member of the council. Surely they want to talk. They announced themselves. As if in response, the Retribution fired a single shot. Not at any ship or station, but at a lifeless asteroid floating nearby. The asteroid didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, converted to its component atoms in a flash of light that temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. The message was clear. We could have fired at you. Admiral Chun is waiting for our response, reported communications. She seems patient. Crixtal found that somehow more terrifying than aggression would have been. The humans weren't here in anger. They were here to make a point. Open a channel, he commanded, trying to keep his tentacles from betraying his fear. The view screen filled with a human face. Admiral Chun looked remarkably ordinary, middle-aged by human standards, with black hair streaked with gray and eyes that held a disturbing mixture of weariness and determination. She could have been someone's grandmother, if not for the uniform and the steel in her gaze. Ambassador Crixtal, she said pleasantly, I've heard so much about you. All of you, really. The Coalition's greatest minds, its most powerful fleets, its most advanced civilizations. Impressive credentials. Admiral Chun, Crixtal managed. Your arrival is unexpected. The quarantine. Yes, about that. Chun interrupted, and several species gasped at the breach of protocol. 300 years of isolation. Do you know what you've done to us? Protected you, Crixtal said automatically. Your species showed dangerous tendencies. The violence, the wars, the inability to unite, even among yourselves. Chun laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Protected us? You locked us in a cage with ourselves. Do you know what humans do when they're cornered, Ambassador? When they have no external enemy to fight. She gestured to something off-screen, and new images appeared. Earth, as the Coalition's last probes had seen it, divided, warring, polluted. Then, a timestamp, 50 years after quarantine. The wars had intensified. Cities burned. Oceans boiled. We almost destroyed ourselves, Chun continued. Almost. But then, something interesting happened. A child in what used to be London looked up at the stars and asked why we couldn't go there. Her teacher had to explain about the big, bad aliens who said we weren't good enough. That we were too violent, too primitive, too human. The images shifted. Suddenly, the war stopped. Not through peace, but through purpose. Every factory that had built bombs now built ship components. Every soldier became an engineer. Every nation's resources poured into a single goal. You gave us an enemy, Ambassador. The one thing guaranteed to unite humanity, someone telling us what we can't do. The scale of it became clear as more images flashed by. The entire planet had transformed itself into a shipyard. Mountains were hollowed out to become foundries. Oceans were drained to provide raw materials. The moon had been carved up piece by piece, its mass incorporated into the growing hull of the Retribution. But we're not unreasonable, Chun continued. We've learned a lot in 300 years. Patience, for one. We could have come out guns blazing, seeking revenge for our imprisonment. Instead, we're here to talk. Talk about what? Crixtal asked, though he feared the answer. Your surrender, of course. The chamber erupted again, but Chun raised a hand for silence. Somehow, impossibly, they obeyed. Not conquest, she clarified. We're not interested in ruling you. We've had enough of empires and colonies in our history. No, we want something much simpler. The quarantine ends. Today, every restriction, every blockade, every attempt to keep humanity bottled up gone. We rejoin the galactic community, but on our terms. And if we refuse? Commander Zek growled. Chen's smile was sad. Then, we demonstrate why the quarantine was a mistake. You see, Commander, you were right about us 300 years ago. We were violent, divided, and primitive. But you made one crucial error in your calculations. What error? Crixtal asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. You assumed we'd stay that way. You assumed human nature was fixed, immutable. But humans adapt, Ambassador. It's what we do. You locked us in a cage, so we became something that could break free. You told us we were too violent, so we became violent enough to face anything in the galaxy. You said we were primitive, so we advanced 3,000 years in 300. She leaned forward, and every being in the chamber instinctively leaned back. We're not the same species you quarantined. What you made us. And now we're here to show you what that means. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Outside, the retribution hung in space like a metal mountain, waiting, patient, inexorable. Finally, Mip spoke. What do we do? Crixtal looked around at his fellow council members. The mighty Galactic Coalition, which had brought peace to 1,000 worlds and order to chaotic space. They had faced down aggressive species before, had tamed warlike civilizations, and brought them into the fold. But always they had held the technological advantage. Always they had been the ones setting terms. Now, staring at humanity's answer to their quarantine, Crixtal understood a truth that chilled him to his core. The humans hadn't just built a battleship. They had transformed their entire civilization into a weapon, aimed squarely at anyone who would cage them again. We do what any sensible being does when faced with a superior predator, he said quietly. We submit, we adapt, and we hope they remember mercy. But even as he gave the order to stand down, Crixtal couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The humans had spent 300 years preparing for this moment. What else had they built in their isolation? What other surprises waited in that quarantine system? And most terrifying of all, what would they do now that they were free? The galaxy was about to find out. The Retribution's conference room defied every expectation the Coalition delegates had formed. Where they had imagined cold metal and military precision, they found warm wood paneling, comfortable chairs adapted for multiple species, and windows offering a breathtaking view of the stars. It felt more like a university lecture hall than a warship's heart. Admiral Chun sat at the head of a table that seemed impossibly old, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. Around her, a dozen humans in various uniforms represented Earth's unified command. What struck Ambassador Crixtal most wasn't their diversity. The Coalition was used to different species working together, but their unity of purpose. These humans, who history claimed could barely cooperate within their own nations, moved with a synchronization that put the hive minds to shame. Thank you for accepting our invitation, Chin began, pouring what appeared to be tea from an ancient ceramic pot. I know this is overwhelming. Believe me, we debated for decades how to make first contact. Again, you'll forgive us for being cautious, Crixtal replied, his translator working overtime to convey the proper mix of dignity and wariness. Your arrival was dramatic. A younger human, introduced as Captain Marcus Webb, actually chuckled. You should see what we decided not to bring. The Retribution is our diplomatic vessel. The implications of that statement rippled through the assembled delegates. If this mountain of weapons and armor was considered diplomatic, what did their war fleet look like? Perhaps, suggested Counselor Vera and I of the Ethereal Collective, you could explain how this happened. Our last intelligence suggested Earth was still struggling with basic fusion power. Chin nodded to one of her staff, and the room's walls transformed into displays. They showed Earth as the Coalition remembered it, divided, polluted, beautiful in its chaos. But the timestamp was wrong. This wasn't 300 years ago. This was Earth 1 year after the quarantine, Chin explained. We detected your probes, of course. Primitive as we weren't blind. When they suddenly stopped coming, when our first interstellar probe hit your barrier and bounced back, we knew we'd been judged and found wanting. The images shifted. Cities burned. Nations fell. The death toll climbing into the billions. The revelation that we weren't alone should have united us. Instead, it nearly destroyed us. Every nation blamed the others for our rejection. Every ideology claimed that if only they had been in charge, humanity would have been welcomed into the galactic community. The wars that followed made our previous conflicts look like playground squabbles. Commander Zek shifted uncomfortably. Yet you survived. Barely, Chin admitted. We came within hours of total nuclear annihilation. Multiple times. But Then, something remarkable happened. The display showed a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, standing in the ruins of what had once been New York. She was holding a crude sign that read simply, "Why not us?" Her name was Lisa Park, Chun continued. Orphaned by the wars, like millions of others, she walked into the UN emergency session, what was left of it, and asked a simple question: why were we fighting each other when the real enemy was out there, keeping us locked away? A child changed your entire civilization. Mip asked, her skepticism clear. Not changed, corrected Dr. James Harrison, the Retribution's chief scientist. Catalyzed, Lisa asked the question everyone was thinking, but no one dared voice. If aliens existed, if they had judged us unworthy, then proving them wrong was the only goal that mattered. The images shifted again. The wars didn't end immediately. Human grudges ran deep, but they transformed. Instead of fighting over resources, nations competed to contribute more to the great project. Instead of racing to build better bombs, they raced to build better engines. We reverse-engineered your probe technology. Harrison continued with obvious pride. Crude work, but it gave us a starting point. Every university became a research center. Every factory retooled for spaceship construction. We turned our entire planet into one giant middle finger pointed at the stars. Several delegates shifted at the crude expression, but Chin didn't apologize. If anything, she seemed amused by their discomfort. The first decade was the hardest, she continued. We had to unlearn everything we thought we knew about cooperation. Democracy was too slow. Dictatorship too rigid. We needed something new, something uniquely human. What did you create? Vera and I asked, genuinely curious. The Ethereals had spent millennia perfecting governance, and they recognized the challenge the humans had faced. We called it the Mandate, Chen explained. Not a government exactly. More like, imagine if every human was a shareholder in a corporation called Earth, and the only product we made was spite. Captain Webb laughed at the confused expressions around the table. She's oversimplifying. The Mandate works because it harnesses what makes us human. Our competitiveness, our stubbornness, our absolutely insane refusal to accept limitations. Every nation, every corporation, every individual could contribute however they wanted as long as it served the goal, get humanity to the stars, and prove the coalition wrong. But the technology, MIP interjected. The energy requirements alone for a ship like this, it should have taken you millennia to develop. Should have, agreed Harrison. Would have, if we'd followed conventional development. But humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. And we were very, very necessary. The displays showed the progression. First, crude chemical rockets barely capable of reaching orbit. Then, fusion drives that could push small craft to neighboring planets. But the real breakthrough came when they stopped trying to copy coalition technology and started thinking like humans. You build ships like you build everything else, Harrison explained. Efficient, elegant, optimized. We looked at that and thought, why? Why make one perfect engine when you could strap together 50 imperfect ones? Why build a sleek hull when armor and shields could compensate for drag? Why follow the rules of shipbuilding when the rules were made by people who locked us out? The Retribution's construction played out in accelerated time. The moon disappeared piece by piece, fed into orbital foundries. Mars was strip-mined for rare elements. The asteroid belt became a highway of resources flowing toward Earth. And through it all, the ship grew like some impossible cancer, each section ugly and functional and absolutely terrifying in its purpose. We made mistakes, Chen admitted. The Mark 7 prototype created a black hole that almost swallowed Jupiter. The Mark 12 achieved faster-than-light travel by accidentally shifting into a parallel dimension. We're still not sure how we got it back. But each failure taught us something new. This is impossible, stated Counselor Threx of the Machinist Union. The energy expenditure, the resource allocation, the sheer waste, no civilization could sustain this. No rational civilization, chen corrective. But we weren't rational. We were pissed off. She let that sink in before continuing. Do you know what percentage of Earth's GDP went into the project by year 50? 93%. We were eating synthetic proteins and living in bunkers, but by God, we were building our ship. Children grew up in factories, learning engineering before they could read. Artists became welders. Poets wrote technical manuals. Every human alive was part of the project. That's not civilization, Vera and I said softly. That's obsession. Yes, Chin agreed simply. And it worked. The final images showed the Retribution's launch. Earth itself seemed to sigh in relief as the massive vessel broke free of orbit, carrying with it the dreams and fury of 10 billion humans. The planet behind it was scarred, depleted, but triumphant. So here we are, Chun concluded, 300 years later, asking to rejoin the community that rejected us. But we're not asking as the same species you quarantined. We're asking as what you made us become. And what is that? Krixtal asked, though he suspected he knew. Survivors, Chin said. Adapters. Proof that locking a problem away doesn't make it disappear. It just makes it stronger. The room fell silent. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the drama playing out in their midst. But between them, the politics of the galaxy were shifting like tectonic plates. You spoke of terms, Krixtal finally said. What exactly does Earth want? Chun smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. Full membership in the coalition, access to all trade routes, diplomatic immunity for our vessels, and a formal apology for the quarantine. That's all. Zek asked suspiciously. No reparations? No territory? Oh, we thought about it, Webb admitted. Some wanted to demand tribute. Others wanted to claim systems. But in the end, we realized something important. What? Several delegates asked simultaneously. The best revenge is success, Chin said. We don't need your resources. We learned to make do with our own. We don't need your technology. We developed our own path. What we need is recognition. Acknowledgement that humanity belongs among the stars. Not because you allow it, but because we earned it. And if we refuse? Threx asked, though his mechanical voice lacked conviction. Chin's expression didn't change, but something in the room's atmosphere shifted. The comfortable academic setting suddenly felt like the command center of a weapon that could crack worlds. Then, we demonstrate why the quarantine failed, she said quietly. We have a fleet, counselors, ships that make the Retribution look subtle. Weapons that we developed not by copying you, but by thinking of every dirty trick you never imagined because you're too civilized. We have 10 billion humans who grew up knowing that the galaxy thought we weren't good enough, and every single one of them is eager to prove otherwise. She paused, letting the threat hang in the air like a sword. But we'd rather not. We've spent 300 years preparing for war. We like to try peace instead. The question is, will you let us? The coalition delegates exchanged glances. The answer was obvious. They had no choice. Humanity held all the cards, and everyone knew it. But Chen was offering them a face-saving way out, a chance to make this look like a mutual decision rather than a surrender. There will need to be negotiations, Krixtal said carefully. Terms to discuss, procedures to follow. Of course, Chen agreed. We're not barbarians. We're just humans who spent 3 centuries learning patience. We can wait a little longer. As the initial meeting concluded and delegates prepared to return to their ships, Mip lingered. The small scientist approached Chun with obvious nervousness. Can I ask you something? She squeaked. Of course. The girl, Lisa Park. What happened to her? Chin's expression softened. She touched a pin on her uniform, a small emblem that all the humans wore, but none had explained. She became the first director of the mandate, led humanity for 60 years, until age finally did what war couldn't. Every human ship carries her picture. Every human child knows her name. She asked why not us, and we spent 300 years answering. Mip nodded slowly. And now? Now? Chen looked out at the stars, at the future sprawling before them. Now we find out what happens when humanity stops asking for permission and starts taking its place. As the delegates filed out, None of them voiced what they were all thinking. The galaxy would never be the same. The humans were free, and God help anyone who tried to cage them again. The first human trade ship to dock at Sanctuary Station caused a near riot. Not because of any hostile action, but simply because of what it was. The vessel, cheerfully named Spite and Malice, was a converted warship that still bristled with enough firepower to level a small moon. Its cargo bay, however, was full of something far more dangerous than weapons: human goods ready for trade. Station Master Kellen watched through security feeds as humans emerged from their ship. They moved differently than the footage from 300 years ago suggested. These weren't the chaotic, individualistic creatures the Coalition had quarantined. These humans walked with purpose, each one aware of their role in the greater whole. Yet somehow, they had retained their unpredictability. Station Master, his assistant warbled nervously. The humans are requesting permission to set up a trade booth in the merchant quarter. Standard procedure, Kellen replied, though nothing about this felt standard. Assign them a spot. Level 42, Section B. Within hours, he realized his mistake. The human booth didn't just attract attention. It created a gravitational pull that disrupted the entire station's commerce. Crowds gathered 10 deep to see what Earth had to offer after 3 centuries of isolation. The first surprise was the food. Humans had survived on synthetic proteins for generations, but rather than hide this, they had perfected it. Their food printers could create flavors that didn't exist in nature, textures that defied physics, nutritional profiles that made the Coalition's best supplements look primitive. Try this, offered Maria Santos, the ship's trade coordinator, to a skeptical Altarian merchant. We call it ambrosia. It tastes different to every species, your perfect flavor, whatever that might be. The Altarian scales shifted through a spectrum of colors as the flavor hit. Within minutes, he was negotiating for exclusive distribution rights in his sector. But food was just the beginning. The humans displayed technologies that shouldn't have existed, innovations born from necessity and desperation. Personal shield generators that ran on body heat. Universal translators that worked through interpretive dance. Medicines derived from the toxic runoff of their ship factories that could cure diseases the Coalition had written off as terminal. How is this possible? Demanded Chief Science Officer Attack, examining a human medical scanner that was simultaneously crude and impossibly advanced. The theoretical framework alone should have taken centuries to develop. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, the human medical officer, shrugged. When you can't afford to lose anyone, you get creative. That scanner? We developed it because we couldn't waste resources on proper hospitals. It had to work with whatever we had on hand. The real shock came when the humans revealed their true trade goods, solutions to problems the Coalition didn't even know they had. Observe, said Commander Zhang Wei, the mission's military attaché. He produced what looked like a child's toy, a small, crystalline cube that fit in his palm. This is a quantum stabilizer. Your ships use massive field generators to prevent quantum decay during FTL travel. Yes, this does the same thing, but it's powered by the decay itself. The more unstable the quantum field, the stronger it gets. That's impossible, 3 different scientists said simultaneously. So, it was escaping quarantine, Zhang replied mildly. Yet here we are. The implications rippled through the station like shockwaves. Coalition technology was based on thousands of years of careful, methodical advancement. Each species had contributed their expertise, building on established principles. The humans had thrown out the rulebook and written their own in crayon while possibly drunk on synthetic alcohol. But it was Ambassador Chen's next meeting that truly shook the Coalition's foundation. The Council had assembled in full formal session, every member species represented. They expected negotiations, perhaps some grandstanding. They didn't expect Shun to walk in carrying a battered cardboard box. Before we discuss trade agreements and territorial rights, she began, setting the box on the pristine council table, I need to show you something. She opened the box with careful reverence, revealing hundreds of small devices, each no bigger than a thumb. They looked almost laughably primitive compared to the technology surrounding them. These are memory cores, Chen explained. Each one contains the complete life recording of a human who died during our isolation. Not just the important people, everyone. The factory worker who suggested a new welding technique. The child who drew a picture that inspired an engine design. The elderly woman who kept morale up by telling stories. 137 billion humans lived and died during our quarantine. Every single one contributed to our escape. She activated one at random. A hologram appeared, a middle-aged man in worn work clothes, laughing as he showed off a minor improvement to a fuel injector. The recording lasted 30 seconds, but in that brief moment, the assembled aliens saw something that challenged everything they believed about humanity. This wasn't a warrior species. This wasn't a race of conquerors or destroyers. This was a people who had turned their entire civilization into a single organism dedicated to one purpose, and somehow maintained their individual humanity in the process. You quarantined us because we were too violent, too chaotic, too human, Chen continued. But you never asked why we were those things. We fought among ourselves because we had no greater purpose. We were chaotic because we had no unifying goal. We were human because that's what we are, and trying to be anything else would have destroyed us. What's your point, Admiral? Asked Counselor Vrex, though his tone had lost much of its earlier hostility. My point is that you've spent the last few days afraid of us. Afraid of our ship, our weapons, our potential for revenge. But you're afraid of the wrong thing. She gestured to the memory cores. You should be afraid of this. Of what happens when humanity decides to work together. Not because we're forced to, not because some government demands it, but because we choose to. The retribution isn't our greatest achievement. It's just the most visible. Our greatest achievement is that we survived ourselves long enough to prove you wrong. The chamber fell silent. Outside, the retribution hung in space like a metal moon, but inside, the real power of humanity was on display in a cardboard box full of memories. So let's discuss terms, Chen continued. Not as conqueror and conquered, but as what we should have been from the beginning, neighbors. You have technologies we could benefit from. We have perspectives you've never considered. Together, we might actually build something worth having. And if we refuse, ask Commander Zek, though with notably less aggression than before. Chen smiled sadly. Then we'll leave. We'll take our ship, our innovations, and our 100 billion dead, and we'll find our own way. But you'll always wonder what might have been. And when the next crisis comes, and there's always a next crisis, you'll wonder if the humans could have helped. It was a masterful performance, Kellen realized. Chun had transformed humanity from a threat to be contained into a resource to be cultivated. She had shown strength and vulnerability in equal measure, proving that humans had changed while remaining fundamentally human. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Earth would be granted full membership in the coalition, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. The quarantine was officially ended, its records sealed with a formal acknowledgement of error. But the real victory came in the weeks that followed. Human ships began appearing throughout coalition space, each one an ungainly mixture of borrowed technology and human innovation. They traded not just goods, but ideas, not just resources, but perspectives. A human engineer would look at a problem that had stumped coalition scientists for decades and ask, but have you tried hitting it? And sometimes, absurdly, that worked. Human medical teams arrived at plague-stricken worlds with treatments cobbled together from industrial waste and good intentions, and somehow people recovered. Human negotiators settled centuries-old disputes by getting both parties drunk on synthetic alcohol and making them arm wrestle for the rights. Human artists created works that made no sense to anyone, including other humans, but somehow conveyed emotions that transcended species. And through it all, the memory cores spread. Every human ship carried copies, freely given to anyone who asked. The story of humanity's isolation became required study in schools across the galaxy. Children of 100 species learned about Lisa Park, the girl who asked, "Why not us?" and changed the course of history. But Perhaps the most significant change came from the coalition itself. The quarantine had been based on the assumption that violent species couldn't change, that chaos was incompatible with civilization. Humanity had proven both assumptions wrong, and, in doing so, forced the coalition to examine its other prejudices. The warrior clans of Nexus 7, isolated for their aggression, were offered a second chance. The hive minds of the Scorpio sector, shunned for their alien thought patterns, found advocates among humans who understood being different. Species after species that had been marginalized or excluded suddenly had an ally who knew what it was like to be judged unworthy. "You've started something," Crixtal observed to Chun during one of their regular meetings. The coalition stood unchanged for millennia. "Now, everything is in flux." "Good," Chun replied. "Stagnation is death. We learned that the hard way. Change is painful, chaotic, sometimes destructive. But it's also how you grow. And if we grow in directions you don't like." Chun laughed, a genuine sound that had become common in coalition space. "Then we'll adapt. It's what we do. You locked us in a cage for 300 years, and we turned it into a chrysalis. Whatever comes next, humanity will face it head on." As she spoke, new reports were coming in. A human exploration vessel had discovered a species even more violent than pre-quarantine Earth, and, instead of recommending isolation, had initiated first contact. A human trader had accidentally created a new form of mathematics while trying to cheat at a gambling game. A human child on a coalition world had asked another simple question that was already sending ripples through academic circles. If space is expanding, what's it expanding into? The galaxy was no longer freezing in fear at humanity's arrival. Instead, it was warming to the chaos, the innovation, and the sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitations that humans brought with them. The order of millennia was giving way to something new, something unpredictable, something decidedly human in its influence. And, in her cabin aboard the Retribution, Admiral Chun looked at the picture of Lisa Park and smiled. The girl had asked why not us, and humanity had spent 300 years answering. Now, they were asking the rest of the galaxy, why not more? Why not better? Why not together? The answers, Chun suspected, would be worth the wait. The distress call came from the edge of known space, where coalition charts showed nothing but void. The signal was weak, distorted, but unmistakably a plea for help. Most coalition vessels would have noted it and passed by. The outer darkness was notorious for false signals and